She walked onto the base with no rank, no salutes, just a plastic badge and a quiet smile. Everyone thought she was just another admin clerk. But by the end of the week, the new girl would command a crisis, stop a mission from falling apart, and reveal a secret that left the entire base frozen in disbelief. This is a powerful military leadership story about a female military leader who went undercover and showed what real strength looks like. Subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below, telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from all corners of the world. Let's get started. That morning, Grace Langford stepped onto the grounds of Falcon Ridge Naval Base, looking more like a weary traveler than a woman who had once commanded entire strike groups through hostile waters. She wore faded jeans, an old gray hoodie, and carried a single duffel bag light enough for one hand, heavy with stories no one would hear today. The medals, the citations, the plaques with her name etched in brass, locked away in a storage crate back in Washington, forgotten on purpose. Her badge said administrative transfer, 2 words that made her invisible. Falcon Ridge was a base barely holding itself together, all cracked pavement, rusted fences, and morale hanging by a thread. As Grace walked past a group of junior sailors outside the smoking area, not a single head turned, no salutes, no second glances. Good, she thought. That's exactly what I need. No one knew this woman had once stared down war zones, lost friends to silence over comms, and made calls that kept ships and people alive. But soon, they'd remember, not her name, her leadership. Falcon Ridge didn't scream failure. It whispered it in the sluggish printers, the flickering hallway lights, the way no one made eye contact when something broke, again. Grace Langford reported to her assigned office with no fanfare. A young clerk named Petty Officer Dawson barely looked up when she handed over her transfer paperwork. Admin support, he muttered, eyes scanning the screen. Welcome to the logistics circus. He gave her a badge and pointed down the hallway like he was warning her, not guiding her. The logistics office was a battlefield of its own, phones ringing off the hook, boxes stacked like sandbags, desks cluttered with folders no one had touched in weeks. At the center of it all was Major Hannah Holloway, sleeves rolled up, tablet in one hand, barking updates with barely restrained exhaustion. Grace waited quietly until she could speak. Ma'am, transfer from D.C. Reporting is ordered. Holloway blinked, took the file from her, sighed. Another admin body. Okay. Welcome to the mess. She looked Grace up and down and added, hope you don't scare easy. We lost 2 to burnout last month and 1 to promotion. Consider yourself dropped into the deep end. The room didn't pause for her. A sergeant behind a nearby desk grinned and muttered, let's hope she types faster than the last one. Some chuckled. One clerk gave her a side eye and rolled hers. No one offered a chair. Grace didn't flinch. She found her desk dusty, slightly wobbly, stacked with forgotten requisitions. She set her duffel down, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. Not one person knew that the woman quietly logging into a guest account had once managed crisis logistics for half the Pacific Fleet, that she'd run ops while under missile threat, that she had seen more 3-0 or emergencies than any of them could imagine. She didn't tell them. She listened instead. She watched how Major Holloway rubbed her temples every time a new batch of forms bounced back from supply. She noted how the Sergeant Briggs, his nameplate read, cursed every time a shipment was rerouted with no notice. She saw how one young sailor, Turner, stared at his screen like it was actively trying to drown him. And she said nothing. Not yet. But what broke her heart wasn't the chaos, it was the resignation, the quiet sighs, the shrugged shoulders, the jokes told not to amuse but to survive. These weren't lazy people. They were exhausted people, led by systems that didn't care if they succeeded or failed. By the end of day 2, Grace had untangled 3 weeks of misfiled inventory. By day 4, she had caught a data entry error that would have sent $200 worth of equipment to the wrong coast. Still, no one noticed, and she liked it that way. She stayed late each evening, long after the clatter died down. One night, Turner approached her hesitantly. "Ma'am, I think I messed up," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "There's a backlog I can't fix. I've been staying late, but every time I touch one file, 3 more break." Grace didn't scold him. She didn't suggest he figure it out. She pulled her chair beside him and said softly, "Show me." 3 hours later, she handed him a handwritten checklist. "Use this," she told him. "You're better at this than you think." Turner looked at her like no one had ever said that to him before. By the end of her first week, people started to talk. They didn't know her name not yet, but they noticed she didn't roll her eyes at complaints. She didn't pass off problems. She stayed, she listened, and somehow, she always knew just a little too much for someone who was supposedly new. One afternoon, she walked through the motor pool with a stack of forms. Staff Sergeant Cole, covered in grease and swearing at a broken torque wrench, barely glanced at her. Another empty promise from logistics, he barked. "You paper pushers don't know what it means when these trucks don't roll." Grace didn't argue. She simply replied, "Then tell me what you do need not what we promised, but what'll actually get the job done." He paused. No clerk had ever asked him that. "Start with truth," he grunted, "not optimism." She nodded. "Done." And just like that, one more wall cracked. They still didn't know who she really was, but something was shifting. The quiet woman in the gray hoodie wasn't cracking under pressure. She was making them question everything they thought they knew. And soon, they'd learn the storm wasn't coming. She was the storm. It didn't come with sirens or flashing lights. The storm rolled in like a memory quiet at first, then ruthless. By dusk, the wind howled like it wanted inside every window of Falcon Ridge Naval Base. Rain slapped sideways against the logistics office, power flickered, and no one had time to care. Phones still rang, printers still jammed. The mission hadn't paused just because the weather got angry. Major Holloway stood over Grace's desk, rubbing her forehead like she was holding her brain together by sheer will. "We've got a supply flight inbound tonight," she muttered. "Mission kits, comms parts, the stuff Cole's been chasing for weeks." Grace looked up. "ETA? 2300, Holloway replied. "If this storm holds, it won't land. And if we miss this window, we're screwed. Again." Grace didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what it meant to watch help circle overhead and never touch down. She stayed late again, combing through requisition codes tied to the incoming flight, making sure every item was logged, every number aligned. No room for bureaucratic errors tonight. Down the hall, a printer died with a loud whine. Someone cursed. Then came the sound. Beep. It started low, one long, descending tone. Then again, louder, sharper. A warning. Holloway stepped out of her office, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was tight. "What do you mean, tower just lost comms?" A pause. "You've got to be kidding me." She hung up and looked at Grace. "With me, now." They moved through dim corridors, lights flickering like candles on their last breath. The rain outside had turned vicious. It sprayed under door frames, leaked through old seams in the roof. Inside the communications hub, the air was thick hot with tension and failing equipment. Screens blinked with red and yellow alerts. Data streams froze mid-update. Staff Sergeant Daniel Pike was yelling into a landline. "We've got an aircraft inbound, and the tower can't maintain clear channels. If this link goes down, they'll divert. And in this soup, they'll never get back." One screen showed the plane's transponder, blinking in and out like a dying heartbeat. Grace scanned the chaos. The comms officer on duty looked like a deer in headlights, flipping through an outdated manual. No one was giving orders. Everyone was reacting. And that's when she moved. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Switch tower traffic to frequency 325, she said. "Calm as stone. Pike checked the backup antenna manually. Don't trust the screen. We need eyes on every relay from tower to base." People stared. "Sergeant Cole has a generator unit," she added. "Call him. Tell him we're losing voltage in here and I want this place lit if the main grid dies." Pike blinked at her. "How do you—" "Because I've seen a flight go down over the Gulf," she replied. "All because someone spent 30 seconds debating procedure." No one argued. They moved. Cole's voice came through the line a few minutes later, wind howling in the background. "I've got a team outside with a portable generator. We'll tie you in if power drops again." Grace nodded. "Do it. I'll clear whatever access you need." Inside the hub, things began to stabilize. Pike's voice returned over the internal comm, backup antennas holding barely, but we've got cleaner signal on 325. Suddenly, the static from the aircraft cleared. "Sentinel Harbor, this is cargo flight on 325, reading you 5x5. Grace leaned toward the mic. "Maintain current heading. Tower's guiding you through the least severe part of the cell. You're cleared for priority landing. Ground support is standing by." The tower jumped in next, energized by her lead. The entire room exhaled. 15 minutes later, the plane landed safely, cargo intact. It should have been a victory. Instead, it was a reckoning. Holloway stood beside her, silent, eyes wide. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked. Grace didn't look up. She just said softly, "Different storm, same fix." No one in the room knew her full name yet, but everyone felt it. She hadn't just stepped up. She had commanded, and the whispers started before she even left the room. The morning after the storm, the sky over Falcon Ridge looked like it had nothing to apologize for, crisp, clear, impossibly blue. But inside the base, a storm of a different kind was just beginning. People whispered. They didn't say her name, most of them still didn't know it, but they said, "Did you see the way she stepped in?" She knew the alternate comm frequency, off the top of her head. She gave orders like she'd been running that room for years. The logistics office buzzed with quiet tension. Sergeant Briggs, usually the loudest cynic in the room, barely said a word that morning. Holloway didn't speak of the incident at all, but she kept glancing at Grace from across the room with a look that hovered somewhere between suspicion and awe. Meanwhile, Grace sat at her desk, same hoodie, same calm, like nothing had happened. But cracks were forming in the assumptions people had built around her. That afternoon, in the chow hall, she overheard two lieutenants from flight operations grumbling over the new readiness schedule. "It's impossible," one said. "Sleep cycles, flight hours, inspections. No one who wrote this has ever actually flown." "Exactly," the other scoffed. "Bet the pencil pusher who drew this up never even left a desk." Grace paused at the coffee pot, tray in hand. She didn't interrupt, didn't correct them. But the truth. She had written the original framework for that exact schedule 3 years ago on a whiteboard inside a forward ops center in Okinawa. She remembered drawing it out by flashlight after a blackout. She remembered getting it approved between mortar drills. But here, she just poured her coffee, stirred once, and walked away. Later that day, she stopped by the motor pool again. Sergeant Cole greeted her with a nod, but this time, there was no sarcasm, no eye roll. "I heard you kept us online last night," he said. "Storm hit hard." Grace shrugged. "Wasn't just me." "You knew where to push," he replied. "Most people don't, especially not transfers." He didn't say it, but the question hung in the air. Who are you? Really? Grace offered him the same calm smile. Just someone who hates seeing good people lose because the system's broken. And then she moved on like she always did. But it wasn't just whispers anymore. People started watching her more closely. The young sailor she'd helped with data backlog, Turner, now checked in with her before starting anything new, not out of fear, but trust. Holloway, for all her exhaustion, began looping Grace into briefings, sometimes without even realizing she was doing it. In one meeting, the communications officer stumbled through a report. "We need to look into relay load balancing. The backup system almost failed again." Grace tapped the edge of her notepad. "Your load split was defaulting to a 60-40 distribution," she said gently. You'll get better redundancy if you assign based on historical traffic peaks. The room went quiet. Have you worked in communications before? The officer asked, slowly. A few times, she said simply. No one pressed further, but eyes lingered longer now. That night, in the logistics office, long after everyone had left, Petty Officer Moore stopped by her desk. He meant to drop off a report, but as he turned, something caught his eye. A sliver of skin above her wrist, a tattoo, old, faded, just visible under her sleeve. It wasn't decorative. It was the outline of a trident, wrapped around a symbol used only by a few officers who had once held command at sea. Moore froze. Ma'am, that's Navy Command insignia, isn't it? Grace tugged her sleeve down casually. Old mistake, she said. I keep it to remember. Moore didn't ask anything else. But he walked away differently than he'd approached. The next day, 2 sailors chatted in the break room about Japan, arguing over which port city had the best ramen. One of them turned to Grace as she poured her coffee. You ever been out that way, ma'am? She answered in fluent, effortless Japanese, the rhythm perfect. Both men stared. You sound like you live there, one said. Once upon a time, Grace replied softly, then left the room before they could ask more. And that's when the whisper turned into something else. Not just gossip. Respect. They still didn't know her rank, but they felt it, in how she walked, in how she watched, in how she led without announcing herself. What started as curiosity was becoming recognition, and soon the whole base would understand. The new girl was never just a clerk. She was a commander in disguise, and she'd been leading them long before they knew they were following. The wind howled again. But this time it wasn't metaphorical. By late afternoon, dark clouds had swallowed the horizon outside Falcon Ridge. Radar called it a coastal system. Locals called it a nasty one. Everyone on base had that look like they were bracing for something more than weather. Inside the logistics office, Major Holloway stood with her hands on her hips, brow furrowed as she stared out the window. Rain began slanting sideways. We've got another flight coming in, she muttered. This one's critical. Comms gear, vehicle parts, high-priority readiness kits. She looked over at Grace. If this one doesn't land, we lose at least a week. Maybe more. Grace nodded once. What's the backup plan? Holloway hesitated. We don't really have one. By 2100 hours, the base was drowning in rain and tension. And then, it happened again. One screen blinked, then another. The low, pulsing beep from the comms hub echoed faintly down the hallway longer this time, more urgent. Grace was already on her feet when Holloway's voice cracked through the logistics office, Langford. With me. They raced through flickering corridors toward the communications center. It was déjà vu, only worse. Inside, humidity clung to the walls. Screens flashed with critical alerts. Data streams jittered across monitors. Tower traffic was unstable. Backup systems were struggling. Again. Staff Sergeant Pike was already shouting into the comms relay. Headset half off. The tower's got the bird on approach but keeps losing signal clarity. Flight says fuel's tight. If we don't fix this, they'll abort. An airman spun in his chair. Ma'am, our vehicle tracking is misfiring too. If we have to scramble emergency response, we don't know which trucks are where. The officer on duty stood frozen, manual open, eyes wide, sweating. No one knew what to do, until Grace spoke. Her voice didn't rise above the chaos it cut through it. Switch tower traffic to frequency 325. Pike, don't rely on diagnostics. Physically verify every cable from relay to tower. Get eyes on the connection chain. Someone stammered. But ma'am. She didn't stop. Call Staff Sergeant Cole. Tell him we need auxiliary power in case the grid drops. Get a portable generator on standby. Pike blinked. How do you know that frequency works with their onboard system? Grace looked him dead in the eye. Because I designed their emergency comms protocol 5 years ago in the Gulf. I didn't guess I remember. That was the moment. You could feel it. No more whispers, no more theories. Recognition. Orders started flying not from chaos, but from control. Within minutes, Pike confirmed backup antenna is holding. I bypassed the bad segment. Signal's clean. The tower's audio cleared. Sentinel Harbor, this is cargo flight. Switching to 325, reading you 5x5 now. Maintain heading, Grace said into the headset. Her tone calm as the storm outside was violent. You're being vectored through the lightest part of the cell. Expect turbulence. You're cleared for priority landing. The operator beside her hesitated, then looked over. Ma'am, would you like to stay on comms? Grace handed the headset back. You've got it. Just make sure the tower logs the frequency shift. If command asks, they'll need to know why it worked. The aircraft touched down 10 minutes later, just before the winds peaked. On paper, it would read like protocol saved the night. But everyone in that room knew the truth. When it was over, Holloway stared at her, speechless. Where did you learn to command like that? Grace didn't flinch. I didn't learn it. I lived it. And by morning, the base did something it hadn't done in a long time. It stood still. The rumor spread faster than fuel through an open line. That admin transfer, she'd spoken like a battle group commander. She hadn't hesitated. She hadn't doubted. She'd led, and every pair of boots that once laughed at her now felt heavier. Every sideways glance became a quiet realization. They hadn't just underestimated her. They'd served under her. They just didn't know it yet. But they were about to. The sky was clear again. But something had shifted at Falcon Ridge, and this time, it wasn't the weather. It was them. The sailors, the officers, the mechanics, the clerks, even the gate guards. They didn't speak it out loud, but you could feel it in the silence, in the way conversations quieted when Grace Langford walked by, in the way heads turned not with suspicion anymore, but with a different kind of attention. Respect. Grace didn't change, not outwardly. Same calm pace, same soft-spoken presence. But now, people watched her like they were seeing her for the first time. Because they were. Whispers turned to certainty. She's not just logistics, someone muttered in the chow line. I heard she used to command a destroyer, said another near the motor pool. Someone saw her tattoo, said only high-level Navy gets it. No one used her rank because no one knew it. Not officially. But that didn't stop the shift. People started coming to her quietly, respectfully like they would to a senior officer, not for show, but because they trusted her. Seaman Turner, the overwhelmed junior clerk she'd helped in week 1, had transformed. He was still quiet, still shy, but now he handled entries with confidence. He even started helping others. One afternoon, she passed by his desk and caught him using her checklist to guide a new sailor. He looked up and grinned sheepishly. Hope you don't mind, ma'am. Grace smiled. I'd be disappointed if you weren't. He flushed with pride. It was the first time she'd seen him stand tall. At the motor pool, Staff Sergeant Cole now met her with a nod that said everything. Not who are you, but I know who you are, and I'll follow. He even started forwarding her flagged equipment issues before Holloway asked for help. You've got better eyes than most officers I've worked with, he told her one day. Can't fix the fleet if no one listens. Grace had simply replied, then let's keep listening. In the comms hub, Sergeant Pike made space for her whenever she dropped in, not because she demanded it, but because, deep down, he wanted her insight. She never gave orders, never pulled rank. She just asked the right questions. And that alone was leadership. Then there was Major Holloway. Tough, overworked, sharp as a whip and fiercely loyal to her people. For weeks, Holloway had kept her distance, held her close like a test she wasn't sure she was passing. But after the storm that changed, it started small, more eye contact, then quicker updates, shared notes, impromptu debriefs. Grace didn't push. She didn't need to. One evening, Holloway stopped by her desk after everyone had gone home. You stayed late again, she said. Grace glanced up. Old habits. There was a pause. Then Holloway asked the question she'd been holding for days. "Who are you really?" Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Someone who's worn enough rank to know it doesn't fix broken systems, but presence does. Listening does. Doing the work quietly does." Holloway exhaled, nodded. "You're not what I expected." "Neither was this base," Grace replied, "but here we are." From that night on, the distance between them disappeared. Holloway began leaning on her not just for logistics, but for leadership. Grace didn't override, she amplified. She made Holloway stronger, not smaller. That was Grace's gift. She didn't need the room. She became the room. One morning, a clerk from another department walked into logistics and dropped a folder on her desk. "Here you go, ma'am." He said, no sarcasm this time. "Heard you're the one who gets things untangled." Grace smiled politely. Later that week, a captain from operations popped his head into the office. "Is Langford here?" he asked. "We're looking at realigning readiness protocols, could use her brain on it." Word was out. No one said it openly. But they didn't have to. They weren't just following her anymore. They were learning from her. The morning arrived without warning. No alarms, no storm. Just sunlight, golden, sharp, and clean, stretching across the tarmac and casting long shadows from every hangar and flagpole. Falcon Ridge Naval Base stood in full formation. Hundreds of sailors and officers lined the parade field. Boots shined, uniforms pressed, eyes forward. Brass instruments gleamed in the light, held at the ready. The wind off the sea carried the scent of jet fuel and salt. They'd been told a new commander was arriving today, from Washington, some rising star admiral known for her tactical brilliance, a reformer. The whispers circled. Probably another paper pusher, just someone who'll give speeches and then disappear behind an office door. None of them expected her to come from within their own walls. The band struck up a sharp march. The announcer's voice crackled through the loudspeakers. "Attention on deck. Prepare for the arrival of the incoming commanding officer." Every head turned toward the front gates. But she didn't come from there. She stepped out from the side of the field, sunlight catching the white of her full-dress uniform. Grace Langford. Clean, crisp lines, polished shoes, every ribbon, every medal in perfect alignment. And on her shoulders, Admiral stars. Not one, not two, but the unmistakable four-point shine of a woman who had earned her way through fire and silence. There was a pause, like the base itself had forgotten how to breathe. Major Holloway, standing in the front row, went pale, her lips parted. "Oh my God," she whispered. Behind the motor pool fence, Staff Sergeant Cole froze mid-motion, wrench still in hand. In the crowd, Seaman Turner blinked, stunned. Moore muttered, "No way." And then it all fell into place. The quiet woman in the hoodie, the one who'd stayed late, who'd carried boxes, fixed the comm system, rescued a supply drop mid-storm, who knew the protocols better than the people who'd written them. She wasn't some transfer. She'd been their admiral all along, and she'd walked among them without a single word about it. As Grace stepped up to the podium, the announcer's voice returned just slightly shaken. "Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Grace Langford, assuming command of Falcon Ridge Naval Base." Silence. Then, as she raised her hand in salute, boom, the unified sound of hundreds of boots striking the pavement echoed across the field like thunder. Every salute snapped to attention. It wasn't fear. It wasn't obligation. It was reverence. She looked out across the formation, not as a stranger, not as an outsider, but as someone who had earned their respect without asking for it. Her voice, when it came, was steady and low. "I spent my first week here as a name on paper. No rank, no ribbons, no expectations. I walked your halls, listened to your frustrations, read the posters no one looks at anymore. And I saw something." She paused. "I saw systems that failed you, procedures that slowed you, and good people who kept showing up anyway." Another pause, this one heavier. "I also saw the jokes, the doubt, the resignation. But more than that, I saw your heart. I saw how hard you fight, even when no one says thank you, how you carry weight that doesn't show up on readiness reports. Her eyes found Holloway in the front row. Major Holloway, step forward. Holloway obeyed, still stunned, still unsure if this was real. This officer held this command together with grit and grace. She'll now lead our base-wide logistics reform initiative with my full trust. Applause broke the silence. Next, Grace called Staff Sergeant Cole. You spoke the truth, even when it was hard to hear. You'll head our new Operational Maintenance Task Force. Then Sergeant Pike. Your refusal to accept good enough saved lives. You'll lead our Technical Integrity Team. Each name she called, each face, reflected a truth she'd uncovered long before the salutes. She had never been undercover to test them. She had been among them, to understand them. And now she would lead them. From this day forward, she said, we don't fix systems by replacing parts. We fix them by believing again in the mission, in each other, and in what we're capable of. You gave me your honesty when I was no one. Now I ask for your strength as your Admiral. No one cheered, no one shouted. They just stood taller, because now they believed in something again. Not in slogans, not in structure, in her. 6 months later, Falcon Ridge didn't look the same. The buildings hadn't changed, the ocean still rolled in just like before, but inside, everything was different. People walked taller, teams communicated better, systems ran smoother not because of a miracle, but because one woman walked in without rank and chose to lead from the ground up. Admiral Grace Langford never reminded anyone of her stars. She never demanded respect. She earned it day by day in how she listened, how she served, how she saw them. That's the lesson. Leadership doesn't come from titles or stripes or medals. It comes from presence, from the way you treat people when no one's watching, from the calm you bring into chaos, and from the honesty you hold when it would be easier to pretend. Grace didn't inspire them with speeches. She inspired them by walking quietly through their broken systems and choosing to believe they were still worth fixing. And because she believed they did too, if this story moved you, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.